Welcome to the Filipino American Women Project, a podcast show that shares stories and life lessons told by individuals living or have lived in America that are of Filipino descent and identify as female. I'm your host, Jen Amos, a fellow Filipino American woman, and I'm excited for you to join us. Let's get started. Hi everyone, Jen Amos here with the Filipino American Women Project, and I am here with my co-host Nani Dominguez. Nani, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Hello everyone, again.
Yes, again and again, hopefully every episode.
Yes.
So we had decided that we're going to do a casual episode together since this show has started, which was about a month ago already, which I cannot even believe it's been a month. I feel like I've connected with so many people already. Our podcast show has grown in numbers, and we have recently reached over 400 plays since we began. We have 8 episodes right now. This will be the 9th one. And it just seems like those numbers just keep going up. And so I thought that we could humanize those numbers, not just look at them as numbers, and see, really dive into the stats behind these numbers and see who's been listening and share our thoughts about it and what it has meant to us so far. So I know for myself, when I listen to a podcast, there's some podcasts I listen to where I am such a huge fan. And I hear people calling in all the time, leaving messages and feedback or whatever. And there was one time where I actually left a voice message for that show. And I was so first of all, I was in shock. I was like, oh my gosh, they're playing it. Oh, my voice sounds like that. Oh my gosh. But but the point is that I loved how they humanized their listeners, and it's to them it wasn't just a show where they were talking. They brought their listeners on with them, and so this is our way of doing that. And I do want to say that hadn't this podcast started, I wouldn't have met Nani because she had found me on social media, on Instagram. And I think I don't know, maybe it was the first episode. Nani, you can tell me, but you already wanted to reach out and get involved. So I'm curious, before we really dive into humanizing these numbers that we have here, I'd love to get your take on what this project has meant for you so far, even maybe talking about when you first noticed it and had decided to reach out.
Yeah, I think that I mentioned before that I had found you on Instagram, and of course from there I checked out the podcast because I am always on the search for new podcasters in the Filipinx community. Mm-hmm. And when I found, most of the podcasts that are out there aren't specifically focused towards Filipino women, or they're not focused on conversations around identity formation and self-discovery and exploring things like that. They're just sometimes featured as topics on their shows. So when I found this, I was kind of like, oh my God, I don't even know who this is or what the mission of this project is, but I want to be involved because, what little I do know just based off of Instagram and the 4 or 5 episodes that you had posted on the podcast, I was like, this is speaking to me, And so I had DM'd you, and now that I'm working with you and also reaching out to more people to actually come on the show and do interviews with us, I'm finding it really kind of surprising how easy it is to reach out to people and how people are so receptive to collaborating. And that's not something that I expected when I reached out to you or when I first started reaching out to people in general. Yeah, it's been a really nice surprise. And again, I don't know, what's in store for us, this project in the future, or what direction it will take, but I'm just enjoying interviewing people here and learning about their stories and the lessons that they want to share with us. And for me, it's just been a way for me to validate my experience as a Filipino American woman, because without that connection, it's hard to get that validation if you're not super confident in yourself.
Yeah, I love that. The big theme that I got from just hearing you talk is self-discovery. And this is why I decided to call this the Filipino American Women Project, because I think we're a project. I do think that that's part of our experience as Filipino American women specifically, is self-discovery. Because historically,
Mhm.
as we had learned in the last episode, episode 7, about the episode 8, the Maria Clara archetype, we had learned that Filipinas were modeled after this woman who essentially is submissive and obedient and just, kind of standing around looking pretty and being
Mhm.
there for the family. And so when they break out of that, or they start to look outside of that, yeah, it kind of seems like it kind of seems like no one else is doing it. But when you do find people, you're like, oh, I'm not alone in this. And
Right.
even though we don't know where this is headed, that's the part, I think that is also part of our experience. Like, when you're doing self discovery, there's not necessarily a destination. It's a journey. And so
Right.
wherever this goes, because hey, we're going to be Filipino for the rest of our lives no matter what we do.
Right. Right.
Wherever it goes, it doesn't matter, because it's about what we're experiencing now and how we are feeling more connected with other people, and more importantly ourselves, and where we came from. And
Right.
I think that's a beautiful thing, and I think that's more than enough. And I want to just keep this conversation going, because it helps me too. Like, that's I didn't create this podcast just for myself. Like,
Right. It's for
I
all of
want
us.
yeah, I wanted myself to heal, and hopefully other people heal. But if no one else heals but me, that's fine too. Like, and so it's just really awesome that you saw a value in the show, and before you know it, we're on here together. And I have really appreciated, for the little time we've been together so far, I've really appreciated you jumping on and trusting me, and even helping out now in reaching out to other women who deserve to get their stories heard.
Yeah, I mean, it's my pleasure. And I totally was not expecting that as a result when I had reached out to you originally. So, but I'm really glad that you made the offer. And even though, it might have seemed kind of intimidating at first, I'm really glad that I'm doing it. And just like you tell people, it also helps me. Again, that's the purpose. It's supposed to help all of us. So yeah, I think again, my goal, like I've probably said before, is just to connect with people and give them that opportunity to share their story and speak to someone who might be silent but also struggling with the same things.
Yes, and to add upon what you were saying, the thing is, I remember when I did start to try to learn more about my culture and stuff like that. And I had been through a lot of experiences where I was shamed for not knowing. Um, I
Mhm.
I had a situation many times where people said, "Oh, you don't speak Tagalog? That's too bad," or like, "Oh, you should know this,
Mhm.
or you should fight for our rights. You should understand the injustice that's happening to our community." Like, there was all these.
Right.
It's like, as soon as I was interested in it, I was somehow already in trouble, that
Right.
that
Right.
I didn't
Suddenly
have.
you've evaded all these responsibilities that you didn't know you had.
Yeah, I was like, okay, how is this suddenly a thing for me? And I had struggled with that for like most of my 20s, when I, especially starting in college, when I joined a Filipino organization. And yeah, I started to learn more about a lot of the injustice and discrimination that we went through, and the Justice for Filipino American Veteran marches that they would do every year. Just all these things. In December 2016, part of why this project got started was because I wanted to believe that there were people in the same place that I was at. And I wanted to, first of all, celebrate where we were, like where you're at, and just kind of
Right.
go from there. And so
Right.
it's been an incredible experience so far, having met, even prior to this podcast, when we used to do Facebook Live, to have run into very nurturing women who understood where I was coming from, because they shared the similar experiences, and we could just
Right.
enjoy each other's space and exchange stories. And that somehow, became this ripple effect for other women to share their stories. And now here we are on this podcast show, and women are reaching out to us. I mean, now we're reaching out to people, obviously, but there's a combination of us reaching out and recommending other people speak, as well as women being proactive and wanting to come forward and share their stories. So all beautiful.
Right. Yeah, and actually, I meant to ask you, I don't know if I've asked you this before, but have you heard of the book Pinay Power?
I have not. That sounds amazing.
Okay. So I know that you told me before you don't like to read books a lot, and I'm totally the same way. I'm the slowest reader. I feel like I'm dyslexic sometimes. I've been reading this book now for probably 5 months, and I'm only on page 227.
Oh my gosh.
I know, I'm the slowest reader ever, but it's good. And I think that if you haven't read it, you should try. There are a lot of big words, and I'm just saying that because, in my opinion, they're big words that I have to Google like every other sentence. But anyway, I wanted to just read a little quote from a page in that book that I had posted on Instagram earlier. This chapter was basically just talking about how when you Google Filipina, and I think you've also mentioned this on previous podcasts as well, what comes up is not, you get some dirty things that come up,
Yeah.
And so her whole chapter in this book was about how they started this website, newfilipina.com, however long ago this was, I don't even know, and kind of what their goals were with that website. And I thought that what she has here really kind of speaks to also what we're doing.
I'm looking it up
so
right
yeah,
now.
Anyway. Okay. Yeah. And I'll send it to you, like the link on Amazon if you want.
Yes.
But it says their goals are to broaden Filipinas' horizons and to help them discover and harness the power and strengths that they have within themselves, and to connect Filipinas to other Filipinas around the world, to ideas old and new, and to the means to take action for themselves and for others. The organization's goals are not only Filipina empowerment, but also upholding the identity of all Filipinos and ultimately Filipino community healing.
Oh my gosh. I love it.
So I just thought that was like a really good phrase that we could throw in there. And this website, I tried to look at it as well. It looks like it's pretty, it hasn't been updated in a long time, but it's there.
Yeah. I mean, I want to at least like reach out. Yeah. She would. Oh, and that's another thing. Listeners, if you're hearing this and you know of any Filipina authors, we would love to have them on the show. I know that there's, oh gosh, I can't think of her name right now, but she has, here, I will look her up on Instagram since I'm on the computer anyway.
Since we're here.
Yeah. So I think it's a Kamusta Baby, and this, okay. Well, I'm sure the name of it is Kamusta Baby. Give me 1 second.
Is it Kamusta with a K-U?
Is it? Oh, is it? Oh God.
I think Kamusta is K-U. I always make that mistake too. I'm not sure what the correct spelling is.
Yeah, I think you are totally right. Okay, so I believe it's probably, so this is the hashtag. So let's see. Her. Okay. Let me see what her name is.
Oh, she looks familiar.
Yeah. Okay, Melissa. It's Melissa calling you out. Okay, Melissa Leslie Q. Okay, so I had recently noticed her. So she's a young mom, and she is creating books, like children's books, that talk about.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. My best friend just became a mom. Her baby's 9 months, and she's decided that she wants to write children's books too. That's actually why we started going to Filipino Storytime with Clarice. Well, we only have gone once, but we plan to continue to go. But that's exactly why.
Yeah. So anyway, if anyone that's listening to this knows Melissa Leslie Q, actually she's been following our stories, so I imagine she's listening to the podcast. So if you hear this,
hey Melissa.
Hi, first of all, we're totally Instagram stalking you right now, and we would love to, live. We'd love to have you on the show. But yeah, it's really cool how there's so many Filipino authors now. And if you know anyone, like I said, we'd love to reach out and have you on the show, because that's just a powerful thing. I think there's that saying, to be the change that you want to see. And I love how so many Filipino women are doing that. Like they found this void and they want to fill it. And a lot of times it's, like in this case, getting a children's book done specifically for Filipino children. And I just absolutely love it. And I want to continue celebrating that. So yeah, so we're definitely going to reach out. I'm like saying this like out loud as we do this recording. We're going to reach out to this lady with New Filipina, and we're going to reach out to Melissa. So if you're listening to this, just know that you're probably going to get a DM from us soon.
We're coming for you.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, anything else you wanted to share about the New Filipina? I know I kind of went into a tangent there.
No, it's okay. The book is Pinay Power. In the book, she was talking about this website, but the whole book focuses on more. Well, it's mainly about feminism, but it's really good, and especially the first part of it, at least what I've read so far, was really speaking to me, and especially it speaks a lot about mestizas and the identity struggles that we deal with.
Yeah.
Which was really refreshing for me to read, because not a lot of Filipinas obviously put out content on that. I feel like it's kind of the unpopular perspective. But yeah, it's a really well-rounded book.
Very cool. Yeah, I will. I know Anna Marie Cruz with Entrepinayship. They have a book club, and they read books. Yeah, they read. I need to share that with you. I haven't shared her with you yet. I'm going to connect you to the community. But
okay.
Yeah, they have a book club, and they usually read books written by Filipina writers. So I think this is a book that we could totally recommend. And I haven't jumped into the book club yet, but this would give me a reason to be held accountable and
yes.
Yeah, exactly. I just, because that's the thing too, is I feel like I would be able to process this better and actually commit to it if I was doing it in community with other like-minded or other women that are in the similar situation.
Right.
Because otherwise it's like, I don't necessarily need it in my day-to-day life, but I also know that I'm robbing myself of the opportunity to be more of myself if I,
and learn about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes, like, it's interesting because I'm in a interracial marriage. My husband is, completely white. He's as white as they come. And a lot of times I have to, like, as I learn more about my culture and stuff, I educate him. I say, hey, this is why sometimes it's not easy for me to explain myself, or, sometimes this is why sometimes I am so quick to follow you or do what you want to do because blah, blah, blah. So it's really cool to have some historical context when I'm trying to explain it to him, other than me getting upset and saying like,
other than just, this is how I feel.
yeah. It's like, this is how I feel. Like, you did this to me. Like, rather than just, project my frustrations on him, I can articulate like what I'm actually.
And understand why. Right.
Yeah, exactly. So very, very cool. We have mentioned a ton of references so far in this episode. And if you have any other recommendations for us that we could look into or people to invite to the show, please don't hesitate to reach out to us on Instagram or check out the show notes of this episode of other ways to get a hold of us. And we would love to, feature more Filipina authors and just other people you may recommend to be on the show. Anyway, now that we got that out of the way, let's go ahead and humanize these numbers, these 400 total plays that have been growing day by day. And, I could have easily had waited for, like, let's say our first 1,000 plays, but I don't want to take these plays for granted. Like having someone such as you jump on with me, and then even having people direct messaging me on Instagram, I didn't want to wait, to acknowledge like who's been listening to us. So I'm really excited to actually go through these stats with you, Nani. I was planning on going through it by myself, but I figured this will be a very enlightening experience for both of us.
Yeah, it's my first time kind of looking at all of this, so it's all new to me.
Yes, cool. Yeah. Okay, right. So let's go to the first thing here. So as I mentioned, we have over 400 plays so far and counting, and I want to just do a quick breakdown of the episodes, the top episodes that have been listened to the most. So you can see here, Nani, I'm showing the stats. So let's see, when it says top episodes, the most played episodes in your selected time range. Okay, so did you know that the number one top episode so far is actually with Ria Pretekin for her episode? This is episode number 6, What's the Skin That I'm In? What do you think of that, Nani? Isn't that crazy? It has the highest views out of all the episodes so far.
Well, of course, I think it's great. That was my first episode.
Yes, because you were on it.
Because I was on it, of course. No, I'm just kidding. Ria did really good, and I think that a lot of the other people or Filipino women that I see on Instagram are, you know, also moms. And I think that that interview just really spoke to a lot of people, between the motherhood aspect, between the interracial family and interfaith, multicultural motherhood, and how that's helped her form her own identity through wanting to provide that context for her kids. I think that a lot of people can relate to that, whether you have kids or not. So yeah, I can definitely see how that was a popular one.
Yeah, and I think her situation really shows us visually how difficult it is to juggle multiple cultures and faiths, you know, because even someone such as myself, like when you look at me, you're like, oh, she's Filipino. It's like, well, you have to understand, like, I'm of Filipino descent, but I grew up as an American. I actually grew up as I was born as a military child, so there's a whole culture around that. And I was born in Japan. So, you know, I had to deal I had to deal with 3 different cultures, you know, being Filipino, being an American, being born in Japan. And so very often when I would explain to people, when they say, oh, where are you from? I'm like, Japan.
I don't know.
I know. It's like, it's a good question, actually. And so I have to kind of explain this whole thing. And you know, I don't fit whatever box they're trying to, you know, put me in, or really just try to make sense of who I am so that they can understand how to talk to me. Because I understand that, you know, being in an interracial marriage, I was just talking to my mother-in-law about this a couple days ago. You know, in her perspective, it's not like she was trying to be judgmental when she would ask questions about my heritage and stuff. She was really just curious because she was, you know, she's retired now. But prior to that, she was a kindergarten teacher, and she loves learning. She loves reading. She's currently doing a lot of traveling in her retired life, and she just has this curious mind. So when she is asking about me, it's not like, what are you? It's more like, so what are you? You know, it's a different a different tone. And so what I like about Ria's episode is it really just highlights like how, whether you are in interracial marriage, interfaith, or multicultural, what have you, like we all of us collectively have a combination of cultures within us. I know you also, Nani, being mestiza, half Russian and half Filipina, and everything. It's a lot. You're a lot of things, and you're American. So
Right. And I actually just had on my way home from work today in the Uber, like we were talking about in Ria's episode, I always get the question, what are you? And I think we asked her that and how she felt about having to answer that question. And she said something about always being seen as this perpetual foreigner no matter where she goes. And for me, so when people ask me, what are you? And I tell them, probably like 99% of the time, the response is, oh, wow, that's so exotic. And so for me, like, I do take offense to that, but I can also tell, just like you were explaining with your mother-in-law, when, like, what they mean. You know what I mean? Yeah. So if it's a guy asking and he's clearly interested in me, then I know when he says, oh, wow, how exotic, he's not realizing that that's probably not the right word to use. But he's also not trying to be offensive by saying that, versus, you know, someone who doesn't understand the culture or has never met a Filipino person, God forbid, or whatever the case may be, or is judging, you know, just to be outright and is judging and just doesn't know what else to say without offending you. And they think that by using that word, you'll take it as a compliment. But I think I can always kind of tell where it comes from, you know? Yeah,
exactly. It's, you know, I think the best way I can explain this is what is it? Aziz Ansari just released his newest stand-up on Netflix, and he's Indian. He was raised Indian American, but obviously all his life he experienced a lot of racism and discrimination because I think he lived in he was raised in like North Carolina, one of the Carolinas, and it's a very very white dominated community where he grew up. And he was saying in his stand-up early on that he said, I have to say, I really like this group of white people, this generation, because you all are actually trying to understand us now. Like, you all are trying to use the right appropriate words to say to us without coming off racist. Like, he said something like
you're
that.
being considerate.
Yeah, you're actually being considerate. And I agree with that, because I think I can see, at least from, my relatives and stuff, that I can just tell that they are mindful of not making me feel like the only dark-skinned person in the room,
Right.
And they really, I have to say, with my in-laws, they definitely make me feel at home. They make me feel like I'm just another person. And of course, every now and then, like, the question of like where you're from will come up, but for the most part, they treat me like a human being, and I really, really appreciate that. I was telling my mother-in-law, I said, the only time where I feel like I feel like I'm being stereotyped is when I do tell them who I am or where I come from. And then when they say, oh, Filipino, mabuhay, or they say something like they say something in Tagalog, and then they say this whole phrase, and I'm just like, I don't
speak Tagalog.
Yeah, I was like, I don't speak Tagalog. And then there's kind of like this awkward silence,
And then that makes you feel insecure, right?
Yeah, I'm just like, yeah.
That actually also just happened in the Uber ride too. That's how this conversation started.
Oh my gosh, it's so funny.
It was like, he asked me what I am. I told him, and he said something to me in Russian, and I was like, I don't know what that means. And he was like, what? And I was like, no, I identify more with my Filipina side. And he was like, oh, well, then how do you say it in Tagalog? And I was like, I still don't know. I don't know that either. I was like, I only know how to cuss you out in Tagalog. That's all my grandparents taught me.
Yeah, totally. It's odd, because I think when I can only imagine how other Asian, ethnicities and other cultures deal with it. And I feel like a lot of other cultures or minorities can deal with it with more grace, because a lot of them were encouraged to know where they came from. And, like I know with Japanese people and like Chinese, they go to like Saturday school. Someone totally correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I recall, Japanese people have Saturday school, and they maintain their heritage and their language. And so, if someone says, where are you from? They say Japan, and then they say something in Japanese, they'll respond in Japanese, and it's completely fine. I mean, of course, I'm sure there's still that sense of like racism or discrimination, or like, oh, like I don't like to have to, play the show of, yes, I'm from another country. But, it's like when they ask us, it's like, I don't know how to speak that.
It's just that we don't have any kind of context to explain ourselves to other people. So if you're not a part of the culture, I feel like, or you didn't grow up in a Filipino home, it's not really easy to explain to someone like that dynamic and, just like the unspoken rules of our culture. It's not something that you can teach.
Yeah, exactly. So Ria, shout out to you. I know she had mentioned to me that a lot of her coworkers also listen to her episodes. So thank you for.
Oh, good. Thank you, coworkers.
Yeah. So thank you, coworkers. And thank you, Ria, for sharing this with your community over there in Chicago. All right. Jen Amos here, jumping into the middle of our show, as I always do, to remind you why this show is possible. So, at the end of every episode, I tend to say, if you didn't catch our guest contact info, don't worry, we'll have those in the show notes. Check them out. I worked so hard on them. You're welcome. Well, it's been brought to my attention that our show notes are not as easy to find as I thought, which is why, starting summer 2020, the Filipino American Women Project is proud to be partnering with Captivate, the world's only growth-oriented podcast host. Captivate is created for independent podcasters, designed from day one to help you to focus on audience growth and the expansion of your audio influence. One way that Captivate makes our lives easier as independent podcasters is by taking the guesswork out of making a website for your show. That's right, a website for your show. So listeners, starting summer 2020, finding our show notes will be so much easier. All thanks to Captivate. You're welcome, as always. If you're about to start podcasting or are getting burnt out from all the extra work of producing one, like building a website, consider a 7-day free trial, that's right, free, with Captivate by visiting thefil-am-woman.com. That's the Fil-Am, short for Filipino American woman.com. Or, check out our show notes in the meantime, which is in the details section of each episode. Once again, you can visit thefil-am-woman.com or visit the details section of this episode. So the second one was actually with a good friend of mine, Giselle Deo Diaz. She was a communications major in San Diego State, and she's going to be pursuing her PhD soon. I think she's starting this fall. Is it PhD? I think it might be master's. She's going to have to, master's. It's going to be master's. And she's planning on doing master's to get more involved in higher education because she feels like there's not enough representation, like Asian representation in higher education. So shout out to her. And then my episode, actually this episode 3, I did this on a whim because at the time I was trying not to overthink doing the show. I was like, I just need to do it. Like, I'm not going to try to get all my ducks in a perfect row. Even when I did this episode, I think I had to record it at different times. So if you did care to listen very closely, you can hear the sound was different, like in the first half versus the second half.
I feel like nobody but you would notice that.
Yeah. And that's the point. And that's kind of like the point I want to address, is that for anyone that is listening to the show and really wants to speak on it and maybe embarrassed to hear their voice, the only people who are really going to care is yourself. And that's what I've come to notice, is that so far I haven't gotten any feedback yet that my voice sounds awful or that I've stuttered too much or anything. It's more, I get more people responding about, oh my gosh, that episode really resonated with me. That was really powerful. Thank you for doing this. And that's why I kind of just, it may not look like it to all of you, but I actually do the show very haphazardly because no one really notices. At the end of the day, if there's a saying that goes, you can say the right thing to the wrong person and they won't get it, but you can say the wrong thing to the right person and they still will get it. And that's the people I'm trying to speak to, are those who are not so judgmental or particular about how this is presented, but they're more so listening to the message.
Right,
that
they're
we're
focused on the content.
Yeah. So I said a lot. I wanted to kind of get your perspective, Nani, if you had a chance to listen to those episodes and if you had any thoughts about them.
Yeah, I definitely did before I came on, and I agree with that message. And I think that also inspires me to reach out and make connections and do things like this because, the first time I was definitely nervous and worried about what I was going to sound like and all that. And, asking people like, do I sound okay? And everyone's like, yes, you sound like you're fine, but you're right. You're the only one that is overthinking that. So the only way to really get out of that is to just do it and see what happens.
Exactly. And also just understanding that, I think for me, like I remember when I started public speaking in my early 20s, obviously I think the number one thing that people are afraid of in public speaking is just what people would think of them. But I learned to look beyond that and realize, like, this is not about me. This is about whatever message is going to come out of my mouth. And it's more important that I put that out there rather than what I think about myself. And so that's why I love doing this podcast unapologetically. I mean, I cut out the ums and the ahs and the pauses, but for the most part, I'm not like trying to redo certain segments or anything because, what if there was a segment that I was embarrassed about that I cut out that could have benefited someone
else. Right.
Yeah, you just never know. So I'm glad, and I'm glad to have your take on that. So so shout out to those episodes. If you haven't listened to those yet, I was gonna say like the first episode had the second highest, but that's kind of obvious because it's the it's the first
one,
episode.
yeah.
Yeah, so I didn't count that. But yeah, if you're listening to this episode and you are interested in listening to the top episodes so far, I highly recommend that you look into episode 6, episode 2, and episode 3. All right. So let's go ahead and go to the geographic locations of people that are listening in. And I think it's kind of interesting.
Cool.
We have, yeah, I know, right? So so for the listeners, I'm doing a screen share with Nani. And so she's seeing these stats for the first time. So I'm actually kind of like curious to see like your reaction when you see them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what I expected, but yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
Germany, Canada, cool.
Yeah. So just so you all know, just to kind of break down the stats of our listeners, I'll start with the smallest to the highest. We have less than 1% in the Philippines, which kind of makes sense because this is an American-based podcast. We have 1% in the United Kingdom. So whoever that is, thank you. We have 2% in Canada. And I actually want to get a closer look at this because for people that are listening,
wow.
for people
really detailed.
It is, right? It's yeah, that's why I wanted to go through this because it's like, oh, who's listening and where? So in Canada, shout out to Ontario and Quebec. So that's where we have our listeners in Canada. So shout out to you. And thank you for listening to this American-based podcast about Filipino American women. And we have 3% in Germany, which I have no idea who that is, but whoever that is in North Rhine-Westphalia, thank you for listening to our show.
Yeah.
If you're listening to this and you don't hear your location, feel free to message us and say, hey, I'm listening. and we'll give you a shout out at the next time we do these stats and your stat doesn't appear. And of course, 91%, we have the United States, which makes a ton of sense because that's our target audience for this podcast. Okay, Nani, I want you to tell me what you think about this. Yeah, the breakdown of states.
Interesting. I don't know. I mean, again, I don't know where I expected them to come from, but I know that you're in Virginia Beach. I'm in California. We've interviewed someone in New York. We've interviewed someone in Chicago just since I've been on.
Yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? So in case you all are curious, I believe we have, it looks like it's about, if I add this up, let's see, 5, 10, 15, about 30. We have about like 30% of our listeners in the East Coast, about 10% in the Midwest, if that's what you call like Chicago.
Yeah.
Someone
I'm
tell
not
me.
sure.
Yeah. And then the majority is actually in California, 51% in California, which actually is not surprising because I know that California is dense with Filipino communities in so many different states or so many different cities, such as the Bay Area and LA and Vallejo, San Diego, Oakland, Hemet. I've never been to Hemet, so shout out to the Hemet listeners, and San Pablo, about 4% over there. But I'm actually really surprised. I've never been to San Francisco, and 25% of our listeners in California are from San Francisco. So what do you know?
You've never been to San Francisco. You have to come to San Francisco.
Yes, ma'am.
We gotta change that.
Yeah, I do have a friend there that I've been meaning to visit for some time now. So I think, hey, if you're in San Francisco and you're listening to the show and you want me to visit, keep listening to the show and raise your stats because I will highly, highly consider it.
Yeah. This doesn't surprise me. I mean, I'm only knowledgeable about California, so I wouldn't know what to expect in any of the other cities. But yeah, obviously San Francisco is the biggest. LA is there. I'm surprised that Vallejo is third. That's cool. I'm surprised that Vallejo is above Oakland, but that's cool. Well, actually, I'm not. There's a lot of Filipinos in Vallejo.
Yes.
My dad's family was from Vallejo or grew up in Vallejo, and then my mom's was in Oakland. So those are my two homes.
Very awesome.
I don't even know where Hemet is, but San Pablo is in between here and Vallejo. So
Very cool. So it seems to me from what you're saying is that most of our listeners are in NorCal,
Yeah.
and which is kind of disappointing because I'm from SoCal.
Yeah, you've got to get your San Diego friends to listen more.
I do. I have to tell them. I totally have to remind them that I'm doing this show. I think since I moved, I've been doing a lot of things, but one of the things I've done an awful job of is staying in touch with my friends in San Diego and letting them know the projects that I'm working on. So sorry, San Diego, if you're listening to this. I'm sorry, I'll come. But then again, I have visited San Diego 3 times in the last 12 months I've moved. So, I feel like
so it's
that
either
justifies.
or, right? You either talk to them or you visit.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so my friends are always like, hey, when are you going to come back to California? And I'm like, when are you going to come to Virginia?
Right. Probably the same answer.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, I think it's awesome to see a breakdown of the locations of our listeners, and I'm looking forward to seeing how these stats grow. And if you're listening and we didn't mention your location, like I said, feel free to reach out to us and give a shout out to your location, and we'll be sure to bring that up in the next time we do something like this. The last thing that is not necessarily that important are the platforms that you all are listening from. Here we have that basically half of our listeners listen from Spotify and the other half listen to Apple Podcasts. So I understand Spotify because with Anchor, which is the platform we use to create this podcast show, once a show is published, the first place it usually gets published on is Spotify. And then Apple Podcasts, in case anyone is ever curious about podcasting, usually Apple Podcasts and iTunes takes the longest to get your episodes uploaded on or even get your show on. So I'm sort of so I'm sort of not surprised that the percentage is a little bit smaller. And so anyway, that's cool to know. Well, that pretty much wraps up our stats review. Nani, do you have any overall concluding thoughts about what we went over today?
Well, I think this is a lot more detailed than I would have expected to see, and really cool information to have. And yeah, I just want to thank you guys all from all these cities that you're listening from for joining us here.
Yes, I absolutely agree with you, Nani. And I'm going to say that pretty much concludes our episode. Like I said, if you did not hear your location, feel free to give a shout out. And if any part of this episode resonated with you, feel free to leave us a message. You could just check us out in the show notes to learn how to do that. You can actually leave a message where we would play it on our show, or you can send us an email, or you can DM us. If there's any takeaway that you can take from this show, is to get involved and know that we are paying attention to the numbers. We are paying attention to you, and the show is dedicated to you and it's dedicated to us. And we are excited to see where this journey continues to go. So thank you so much, Nani, for your time as always. And I look forward to speaking with you all in the next episode.
Yes, we'll see you guys soon.
And there you have it, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories and life lessons told by the Filipino American woman. If you're interested in sharing your story, please contact us at thefilipinoamericanwoman@gmail.com or find us on Instagram at thefilipinoamericanwoman. Until next time.
Top played episode is actually with Ria Pretekin, and her episode was "What's the Skin?" Oh, sorry, my mother-in-law. Yes. They're on the dining room table. Okay, thank you. I'm going to bed. Okay, well, that's early. Okay, have a good night. Thanks. I read for a while. Oh, I see. Okay. Okay. Sorry. She like does that all the time. Like she'll just like open the door and then start
Just
talking
burst
to me.
in.
Yeah. She's like, and like I give her my schedule. You know, I'm like, okay, here's my schedule. I'm gonna be on the call.
I'm literally recording.
Yeah, like
okay.
Yeah.
I love it. It's
just
okay.
so funny.
We're all family.
Yeah. Okay, starting over. All right.